بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So, Hisham's introduction is there's a lot of fluff there, mashallah. There's اللهم اجعلني خيرا مما يظنون ولا تؤاخذني بما يقولون. It's something that we are taught to say, that when someone praises you, that, oh Allah, do make us better than what they think of us, and do not take us to task for what they have said. When do we have to finish? I just want to stay on time.
You can take it up to 9:40.
9:40, okay. So we have roughly half an hour. As an instructor, I like to expand. So half hour, we will get where we get, inshallah. So no promises. Naam. Okay, so a little bit about Shaykh Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya rahimahullah. He was born in 691, passed in 751, Hijri of course. As Ammu mentioned, he was a student of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. Right? So the introduction that I have in front of me, he's the muhaqqiq, really we can say, says that he followed Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. That he followed Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah in all of his positions. That's not the muhaqqaq position. We do have positions in fiqh where Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he did diverge from the positions of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. However, if we look at it by genre, right? So if we look at it by genre, when it comes to fiqh, usulul fiqh, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he did have differences with his teacher. And it's completely normal. You will see this in every discipline, right? As a student grows, right, and as a student learns, it's a very natural component of knowledge that you're going to have differences between you and your teacher. And that level of munaqasha, or that level of academic discussion, is actually encouraged in our field. And I say that because many times people have this misconception that in Islamic discourse, or Islamic academic discourse, it's kind of a one-way street. But that's not the case, right? In fact, you have many, if you look at Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah, he studied with Imam al-Shafi'i, but he has his own madhab, right? You see Imam al-Shafi'i, he studied with Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who was one of the key students of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. But Imam al-Shafi'i makes his own madhab. Right? And as Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, he continues, he has actually his own views evolve in fiqh. Right? He has al-madhab al-jadid, right? And he has al-madhab al-qadim. Right? So as you study and as you grow as someone that's studying, your views will change. Okay? So now, that was in the field of fiqh and usulul fiqh. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he did have some significant differences from his teacher. As that's not the topic of our subject, we won't go too deep into what those differences were. Okay? But now, when we get into the genre of what we call, right, either when it comes to aqeedah and when it comes to suluk, and I'll explain what suluk is shortly, inshallah. We don't see much divergence between Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah and his teacher Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. Okay? So we mentioned this concept of this field, or this science in Islamic studies called ilm al-suluk. Right? And ilm al-suluk, it comes with many different names. And there's the famous saying in Arabic goes, لا مشاحة في الاصطلاحات. That there is no debate when it comes to terminologies. Right? If someone wants to call fiqh something else, right? If someone, for example, right? If someone wants to call usul al-fiqh معرفة قواعد تفسير النصوص, right? You just say the recognition of those principles by which you interpret text. It's the same thing as usul al-fiqh, right? It's just a different name, okay? So when it comes to suluk, ilm al-suluk, right, it has been given different names, right? Some have just called it ihsan, right? It's the ilm of ihsan. Okay? Ilm al-ihsan is our reference back to that famous hadith of Jibreel, when Jibreel alayhi salam came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, what is Iman, what is Islam, and then the third question was, what is ihsan? Okay? So this science of ilm al-suluk has been called ilm al-ihsan. It has also been called ilm al-akhlaq, right? Yes, akhlaq is many times when we hear akhlaq, the common public has a very narrow understanding of akhlaq. In fact, what most people understand from akhlaq, they understand it to be adab. But adab is different from akhlaq. Okay? So if we want to draw a parallel or relationship between the two, akhlaq and adab, we can say that adab are the manifestations of akhlaq. Okay? So for example, the akhlaq, we'll call it the khulq, right? The khulq will be, for example, tawadu', right? So a person being humble. Right? Now, adab would be that a person, he walks humbly, he dresses humbly, he addresses people in a humble manner. Right? So this has also been called the ilmul akhlaq, i.e., how do you rectify the traits within yourself, within your ego? Right? So it has been called, we said it's been called ihsan, it's been called ilmul akhlaq. Okay? Many of the mutaqaddimun from the salaf, they just refer to it as zuhd. Okay? For example, when we study any science or any genre, one of the things that you will look at is, okay, what are the earliest works written in the subject? Okay? So if someone asks, okay, what are the earliest works that are written on the subject, as you have in many fields, I'm sure you guys are studying it with Dr. Hisham in Usul al-Fiqh, right? If you are studying that, right, you don't always have the science, right, at the time of the Salaf in the formalized form that we have today, right? So even for Usul al-Fiqh, right, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum didn't have a book of Usul al-Fiqh in front of them, right? They had what we call as-Saliqatul Arabiyyah, or al-Malakah al-Fiqhiyya, right? Because they understood that from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? So just like that, at the time of the Salaf, right, you don't have a formal science called ilm suluk. Did the Sahaba radiallahu anhum have this science within them? Yes. Was it formalized? No. Right? Just like with every other science. One thing that you'll notice in all Islamic sciences is that the Islamic sciences begin to be formed when you have a weakness coming in the community. Okay? So for example, take the example of ilm mustalah al-hadith, right? The science of the terminology of hadith. When do you see this form? Right? The Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they didn't used to ask each other, what's your sanad? Right? As the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they clearly state that it was only after the fitna that occurred at the time of Ali when they started asking people, Sammu lana rijalakum, right? Name for us, who are you hearing this report from? Okay? Because at that time now people are fabricating a hadith. Okay? So when a weakness comes, now that science is being developed. Okay? Same thing if you go and you, for example, research the history of Usul al-Fiqh, you will see that, okay, you have many new, what we can call it, people from different cultures, from different languages coming in to Islam, and they don't have that natural understanding of Arabic. Okay? So now you have something called Usul al-Fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh, if you really look at it, is just Usul al-Arabiyyah. Right? Okay? So what I was saying is, now when we get to ilm al-suluk, what happens is, okay, there is a spiritual decline in the community. And that's when you start seeing the formation of ilm al-suluk. Okay? So if we go to the earliest works for ilm al-suluk, what we will see is it's actually, you're going to find it in the books of hadith. Because it's not fully formalized yet. There's a progress, right? It's not just all of a sudden you have a formalized form. It's going to develop organically, it's going to develop naturally. Okay? So in the earliest forms of what you will see, what we can quote-unquote call ilm al-suluk is, for example, the muhaddithun, when they would write, for example, it would be a chapter in a jamia. Right? So for example, it would be a kitab al-raqa'iq. Right? Kitab al-raqa'iq would be if we translate it literally, as Ammu was pointing out to us, that literally is like raqa'iq is things that make you soft, right? So now many times translations will say the chapter of heart softeners. It's like, like muscle softener, muscle relaxer, like, well, what's a heart softener? So a heart softener means those ahadith that, kind of, that take away the harshness from your heart, right? They make your heart soft, okay? So that's what we can really call, okay, this is the beginning of, okay, we have the muhaddithun specifying or dedicating a certain chapter to what we'll call raqa'iq, okay? Then we have, for example, even at the time of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, right, is really basically like the tailgate of the Salaf, right? You can see that he writes a book called Kitab al-Zuhd, okay? So we were talking about the different names that this science has been given, and we said one of them was Zuhd. And the reason it was given was because Kitab al-Zuhd, or asceticism, meaning not being emotionally connected to the dunya. I want to translate that properly because many people translate zuhud as you leave the dunya, right? Maybe that's not such a smart idea because you have to live in the dunya, so don't leave it, you'll die, right? So meaning don't emotionally be attached to the dunya. So let's translate kitab az-zuhud properly, okay? So we've talked about, we said is ihsan, ilmul akhlaq, zuhud, right? People have called it tasawwuf, right? Now where does the word tasawwuf come? They differ from, some say that it comes from suf, because at that time the people that were in this field, they would wear things that were made of wool. You have to have the socio-economic, cultural aspect to that. This was a time where wool was not actually expensive. It was probably the cheapest thing you could find. So that was a way of them kind of being distant from the dunya, not investing too much in the dunya. Right? That's one ta'wil that's been given of why it was called ilm tasawwuf, right? But putting that aside, right? These are just the different names, okay? So when it comes to this science of ilm suluk, right? So we'll stick with this name, ilm suluk, because there's a hadith that says, "Man salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilman, sahhala Allahu lahu bihi tariqan ila al-jannah." Allahumma ja'alna minhum. Right? That it comes as a part of a hadith that whoever treads a path, right? So that's what salaka means. Salaka means to tread, right? Salaka treads a path, yaltamisu fihi ilman, he seeks in it knowledge, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes for him through that seeking the path to Jannah easy, right? Okay? So from that word salaka, that's where suluk comes from, okay? And this idea of suluk is very dominant in the thought of Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, okay? In fact, he has a book, and we're gonna, inshallah, next class actually, we will be taking excerpts from that book, right? Where the name of that book is Madarijus Salikin, right? Madarijus Salikin, we can translate Madarijus Salikin as stops of the seekers, right? Now, what is the seeking? What's going on here, right? There's this metaphor that is very prevalent in the Islamic literature. And that literature is not something that we actually don't know. In fact, we recite it in every salah, right? Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Guide us on the straight path, right? So now connect those two, right? You have the person that's treading the path, and in Surah Fatiha, we're asking Allah to guide us to that path, okay? I understand this is a very long introduction, and we haven't gotten to the slide yet, but just stick with me, we'll get there, inshallah, right? It's part of the suluk, we're traveling, right? Okay, so, right, so, where was I? Yes, okay, right? So, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, guide us on that path. And now the Prophet ﷺ, he also talked about this metaphor that, this path is straight, la tattabi'u subul, don't follow other paths that branch out from this, so on and so forth. So this is a metaphor that is constantly used in our Islamic discussions of spirituality, right? So Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he takes this path and he says, well, for example, if you're traveling from here, right? So, just a real example, right? So for example, if I'm driving from here back to Chicago, right? it'd be completely careless of me to be like, all right, let's pack the kids in the car and let's just start driving. You can do that when you're a bachelor. You can't do that when you're married and have kids. It's very irresponsible, right? So what do you have to do? I say, all right, let's pull out the map. Okay, now when I have the map, okay, what am I going to do with the map, right? I plan that I'm going to take a stop here. I'm going to take a stop here. This is for lunch break. I have to pray dhuhr. Okay, I have to, kids are going to need a bathroom break. Stops along the way, right? So what Ibn al-Qayyim rahimullah, now with each stop, I know how close I am to getting to that goal, okay? So in this path, the goal at the end of the path is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? And what this path or this book that Ibn al-Qayyim rahimullah that he writes, not the one that we're going to use the book that we're using kind of as a base, and we're going to take from other books of Ibn al-Qayyim rahimullah to get a more complete picture of what he's saying, okay? So what he does in this book, Madarijus Salikin, is he highlights the stops on the path, right? And it's really interesting because he says all of these stops that you have, if you look at the name of the whole book, Madarijus Salikin fima bayna iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, right? That if you just take that ayah, only you we worship and only you we seek help, he says between these two, meaning only you we worship and only you we seek help. So ibadah is one stop, seeking help only from Allah is another stop. And he says between these stops, right, if I showed you the table of contents, you'd be like, whoa, this is a long path, right? Because there's a lot of stops on the way, right? Okay. So what we see Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is that when it comes to this genre, he very closely follows his teacher Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, okay? And as you see, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he actually didn't start, unlike many scholars, you can kind of chart the trajectory of their thought and development through their works, okay? Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he actually started writing. He was a prolific writer. I mean, if you just look at the names of books that he's written, it would take us a good few minutes to just read the names of the chapters of what he's written, right? But he starts writing when he has kind of reached his maturity in his academic progress, okay? So you don't see much change in his positions on fiqh, usul al-fiqh, and even really suluk. But what you do see is towards the end of his life, or towards the end of his writing career, he starts focusing more on suluk, okay? And one recurring theme that we will find in Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is that he loves talking about love. That pun actually was not intended, it just happened, right? So he really focused on what we call mahabba, right? And why do I say that? Well, I mean, he wrote a book called Rawdatul Muhibbin, right? So in this book is fascinating. It's fascinating because we'll naqtasim inshallah, right? It's fascinating because he talks about love as an entire subject, right? So Rawdatul Muhibbin, you can call it and translate it as the garden of the lovers, right? Now, unfortunately, and this is why I actually wanted to focus on this, is because of the society and community that we live in the Western context, right? Whenever we hear, as Muslims, we hear the word love, it's attached with so many extra connotations that come with it, right? And that love often is not pure, right? But what Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah over here, he shows this pure, right? What we call al-hubb al-afif, right? So this book is not just about the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He says that he has a chapter on what is the cure for those that are in the sickness of love, right? Maybe not something you read with your children, right? Maybe more, not a PG subject, okay? Khayran, okay? But the point is that this is something that our ulama wrote about, right? They discussed this subject, right? So this aspect of love for Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah was he started talking about it a lot, especially towards the end of his life. Okay? So what we're going to do, inshallah, is we're going to take our Kitabul Fawa'id, okay? Even if you just look at Kitabul Fawa'id, I have around here, right, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. About 10 chapters, right, or 10 headings where he explicitly talks about mahabba. Right? I'm saying explicitly, not even implicitly. He just explicitly talks about love, right? In regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? We talked about this book, Rawdatul Muhibbeen, right? And now if we go back to that book that we were talking about, Madarijus Salikin, you will see that many of the stations that he mentions, they are actually names for love, right? So he has a manzila, he calls it manzilatul mahabba, right? Then he has another one, he calls it manzilatul shawq, right? He has another one, he calls it manzilatul qaliq, right? All of these are names for mahabba, right? And this shows us how important this aspect of love is in our journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That there's so many of these stations are actually revolving around the idea of love. Okay? So we can go ahead and inshallah start now. Right? So if we look at the Arabic word for hub, right? And the Arabic word for love is hub. Now, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he lists nearly 60 words that are used for love. Okay? I'm gonna let that soak in for a second, right? How many words for love do you have in English? Right? That's why Ammu said, don't get the English translation, it's not gonna help you. Right? This is,
I said you can get it, but you will not understand.
yeah,
anything.
exactly. Actually, Ammu sent me a PDF of the translation. I took one look at it. I was like, Ammu, please, where's the Arabic? I can't do this. It's not possible. Right? So we have, right? And what you'll see is all of these names that we have over here, these are used in the science of suluk, right? So for example, alaqa. If we translate alaqa literally, it means attachment, right? I mean, to be connected, okay? This is something that comes up in the science of suluk. How much time do you have? Okay, right, so first slide, alhamdulillah, right? So if we look at the terminology, right? Each science has its own terminology. In the terminology of suluk, you're gonna find these two terminologies often used. Al-waslu wal-qat'u, right? Al-waslu wal-qat'u, wasl means you can translate it as connecting, you can translate it as attaching, you can translate it as arriving, okay? All of these have to go back to the metaphor of you traveling, right? So wasl means you've actually reached the destination, or you're continuing, right? For example, you'll say uwasilu, I'm continuing, right? So you're continuing on the path, right? Inqata'a would mean you're cut off from the path, right? So check how this goes back to this idea of mahabba, because mahabba is that you're connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? Another word that's used is al-hawa, right? Al-hawa is used, for most of us, when we hear hawa, we think, oh, that's talking about nafs and it's necessarily bad. No, hawa is not necessarily bad. It's what you, ma tahwihi, right? If what you desire is something good, and it's not something that's base and animalistic, then there's nothing, fi nafsihi laysa bimadhmum, right? In itself, it's not something that is condemned, okay? Ash-shawq, right? Another really interesting discussion Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah has is, هل هذه الأسماء مترادفات أم بينهم أو أم بينها تباين? Okay, that are these words, are they synonyms, or are they have a joint meaning, but there is a difference between them, right? So when we come to a shawq, and I purposely did not translate these words, because you can't translate the words, right? You're all students of knowledge now, because you're sitting here with this idea of learning. Get out of that habit that you're going to translate an Arabic word into a one English word. Not happening, sorry. It's not happening. Okay? So ash-shawq, He says, الشوق is حركة القلب إلى محبوبه. Right? So it means when the heart moves towards the beloved. Right? So meaning there is an action and there is a movement. Okay? So connect that back to this idea of being on the path. Right? Al-huzn. Right? Every person that's been married has gone through that honeymoon phase where you're separated from your spouse for a little while, very well understands al-huzn, right? Al-huzn and al-huraq, as we see as the last one over there, al-huzn is grief. So you're like, well, what does grief have to do with love? It's like, yeah, you're not married yet. That's why. Right? When you get married, you'll know what, right? So all the married individuals are like, yeah. But no, it's in a good sense, right? It's in the sense that, whenever you're apart from your beloved, you feel that grief that, oh, I wish I was with the beloved, right? Okay? Al-huyam, right? Al-huyam is hama, hama fil wadi, means the person is lost in a valley, right? What does being lost in a valley have to do, right? You understand what I'm saying now? But like, you can't translate it one word. Like, how would I translate this? Be lost in a valley? Like, what? It doesn't make sense, right? So the idea is when the person is in love, this state overcomes him where if you look at him, he looks like he's lost. Right? He's distracted all the time. Right? He's just lost. He's going from here to there, here to there. And subhanAllah, where are we? We're in the days of Hajj. Right? I'm not saying this. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, as inshallah next week if we get to see, right? He says that one of the signs of love is that you love the place of the mahbub, right? And then he explicitly brings the mention of the Kaaba, right? He says this idea that you go to the Kaaba, right? And it's in the idafa, right? It's the house of Allah, and you love that house, right? And you go from Mina to Arafah to Muzdalifah back to the Kaaba. What's that? That's this, right? That's a person that's in love, right? And that's why I actually chose to talk about mahabbah, because we're in the days of mahabbah, right? This is where the Muslim, he manifests his love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? And then al-huraq is closely connected to al-huzn, right? So al-huzn was grief. Al-huraq is that burning, right? So we can translate al-huraq somewhat literally, like burning, but why is that used for mahabbah? Because when you have love for someone and every time you're separated from that person, you feel that hurqa, right? You feel that burn, right? So these are some of the words that have been listed for love.
Just to make, inshallah, clear of this, what our beloved brother Atiq is talking about. This is a whole subject, a whole science of mutaradifat. He gave few words that are here about one word. So the scholars there are books that talk about, is there mutaradifat in the Quran? For example, just to make the word clear, because, I assume he thinks that, the bulk of us get it, but I don't think so. Let me just explain. The Quran, for example, use the word sana. For what? Sana is used for what? For a year, right? He used the term hijjah. For what? For a year. He used the word am for a year. But when you go deep, each one is used in a particular location for a particular meaning. So sana may have to do with years that are tough in this regard. So what Imam Atiq is saying basically, it's a relationship, but all these work explain a certain aspect, and this is the richness of the Arabic, to find 60 words that have to do with this. Same thing when the Quran used the word zawj and ba'al. Those two words are used for a husband, but each one is used in a different connotation. And again, this is, those who remember the Sunday, that there are 50 sciences that came out of Islam eventually. One of them is this taraduf. Can we get a brother to get a chair to the doctor? Please get a chair to the doctor. Oh, there's a chair. Okay, Jazakumullah khair. There's a chair. So we're going to give Brother Atiq another 10 minutes, inshallah. 10 minutes.
Okay. So I've been granted some leeway. Alhamdulillah. Right? So this actually works perfectly into what Ammu was saying. By the way, I call him Ammu because he reminds me so much of like my elders back home. So like being next to him just makes me so happy, mashallah.
I don't take offense in that. There's a big age difference, so I do not take offense.
I mean, right? So this is, he was talking about ilm al-taraduf, right? So meaning the science of synonyms. Now we can go to what we will call ilm al-ishtiqaq, right? Ilm al-ishtiqaq is where you identify what is the source of where a word is coming from, okay? And this is something that you're going to find very commonly in all Islamic books of an academic nature, where they're going to give you two types of definition, right? They will say at-ta'rif al-lughawi and they'll say at-ta'rif al-istilahi, right? So meaning, what is the linguistic definition and what is the jargon? What does it mean in the jargon of that science, right? Meaning, what is the terminology? Okay, what does it mean as a terminology? And the qa'idah or the principle is that there must be a connection between the lughawi meaning and the istilahi meaning. There has to be a connection between the linguistic meaning and its meaning as a terminology, okay? So we all kind of have we can say an intuitive understanding of what is love, right? So we won't really be defining love in this slide, we'll define it in the next slide. But basically to give us an idea of where the word hub is coming from, okay? So if you look at it, some ulama, some scholars of language, right? They've said, hub comes from min habab al-asnan, okay? So habab al-asnan, I'd point to my teeth, but that wouldn't do a good job, right? So if someone has really white teeth that are completely unblemished, okay? So you'll call that habab, right? That's the whiteness or the clearness of the teeth. So it's a safa, it's purity, right? So love is something that is pure, right? It does not accept adulteration, okay? So you can see different aspects of love depending on where you take the source of the word to be coming from, okay? Another, we can say a masdar or أخذ الاشتقاق is al-habab, right? Al-habab is ما يعلو الماء بعد المطر الشديد. It is that what comes upon the water after excessive rain, okay? So now it's like, okay, well, so you've probably seen like, okay, it rains, now there's things, there's flowing, there's things on top of the water. Well, okay, look, what does that have to do with love? Well, the idea is that love reigns supreme. It comes over everything else in the heart, right? Everything else goes down and the love comes on top. Ya'lu, right? It will come on top, okay? The third ma'akhad we can take is ahab al-ba'ir, right? So if you look at the first two, they were nouns. Now the third one is being taken more from the meaning of a verb, right? Ahab al-ba'ir. Ahab al-ba'ir is يعني إذا برك ولم يقم. That when a camel kneels down and does not stand up, just keeps sitting, right? So I'm not seeing the connection again, right? Well, the idea is now al-ba'ir yulazimu al-ard. Okay, yulazim is always a word I have difficulty translating. I mean, he's like is sticking or is staying, right? It's is staying persistent with, okay, or is attaching itself to the ground, okay. So similarly, right? Al-muhibbu yulazimu dhikra al-mahbub. Okay? So similarly, the one who loves someone is always attaching themselves always with the mahbub, right? Either, if possible, physically or through remembrance. Okay? The fourth one we have is hibban. Hibban in Arabic is actually another word for what we call qurt, right? Qurt is the earring, right? So this one's really strange. Like, well, what does an earring have to do with love, right? No, it's not talking about that, you should gift your wife earrings. That's not what it's talking about. You should, that's a separate point, right? But what does a qurt do? A qurt, it's what we call in Arabic qaliq, right? It dangles, right? It dangles back and forth, okay? Right? So it's always in this في حالة الاضطراب, right? It's kind of like, remember how we talked about al-hiyam, right? Where a person is going from one valley to another valley and just kind of seems lost, going back and forth because love has just put that person in a state. That's where they're saying hibban is. Hub is coming from hibban, okay? It's not the last one. He actually lists a whole lot. He goes on for another few pages. I selected the ones I liked. Okay? Al-habbu is al-hub, right? Al-hub is taken from al-hab, right? Which is the plural of habba, right? So habba is a seed, right? So now seed, this one is actually somewhat easy, right? Because it's the asal, right? So what you have in the seed, you have the original of the plant, okay? Right? So the hub asl kun shay. And love is the root and the essence of everything. I believe my time is up. Right? I do believe it is up. Inshallah.
Ask the brothers and sisters. Before we open the door for question, I want to just an honest feedback. Is this very detailed for you, or you like it? Those who like, it's very detailed. Do you like it this way, or do you like the speaker to get into more subjects and be brief in this regard? Those who think that the way that this went is good and we like it to continue this way, raise your hands. Okay, no question about it. Jazakallah khair. Okay, time for questions and answers. But before that, let me just mention something. Some of you were at the funeral yesterday, and I mentioned two words from the book Al-Fawa'id and elaborated on it after the funeral. That he talked about how the dunya is like a souq, a market. Outstanding, the way of seeing dunya and seeing our lives. And then he go and elaborate. But just for the sake of to emphasize, give me 1 minute, of the fact that it's useless to read the English. Although, feel free to read it, I just want to show you how this thing was really put into something that written literally. So he writes in the translation, of course, buy success for yourselves today, for the market still exists, and the price is affordable, and goods are low priced, and do not wait until the market of the goods are inaccessible, in which Allah says, ذَلِكَ يَوْمُ التَّغَابُنِ. Of course, this is English, but you will have no clue what he's talking about. Why? Because the translator translated the writings of Ibn al-Qayyim, which, as he said, the prophetic writer who precisely get to the point that you need somebody to explain it to you. So if you still need to look at the English, be my guest. But this is a sample. You have no idea what he's talking about. Buy success for yourself today, for the market still exists, and the price is affordable, and goods are low priced, and do not wait. You see where I'm heading with this. Questions? Comments for Brother? Yes, Brother Muhammad Yasin. Yes, Akhi.
So the question was, can we explain what is ilm suluk? So ilm suluk comes from this idea of a person is traveling or is on a path, right? So ilm suluk is how do you travel on that path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? So what are, like we said, the book that Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah has, what are the checkpoints? Right? So when you get to a certain spot, you're like, oh, okay, I know I'm going on the right track now. That's the basic idea behind ilm suluk.
Yeah, most of the people use the word behavior, but it does not really give the meaning. The way that we behave toward Allah or behave toward ourselves. So the word behavior, you will see it in some translation. But as Imam Atiq said, that's not what it is. Suluk is a little more, or much more deeper than that. But that's sometimes the translation roughly is given. I'm not sure how on which basis.
And that would really miss the mark. If you translate it as behaviors, أخطأ الهدف, you miss the target. Now. الزهد. Yeah, za, ha, dal. Zuhud. Now. He was born, I'm not good with my dates. He was 691, he passed away 751. He wrote a lot in 60 years.
Brother Muhammad Yassin, the different terminology that Sheikh Atiq used, from the suluk to the raqa'iq to ilm al-zuhd, used at different stages. What I think we need to be very, very careful on one of them, because these days you will find many people who claim to be among the people of Sufa. So, they are Sufis. And unfortunately, they have nothing to do with the bulk of them, with what he's talking about. I'll give you an example. The New York Times had an article where a CIA agent was invited to the Sufi meeting in Cairo to have a plan against the Islamists. I mean, this is the New York Times. I'm not making this thing up. So now the so-called, Sufi movement, same thing. We have a brother in California who have a college. United Arab Emirates just gave him $50 million. Why? Because he took a stand against other Muslims to promote United Arab Emirates, who are fighting Islam at different stages. So the ilm al-tasawwuf that Mawlana is talking about has nothing to do with those people. Just be careful in this regard. Any other question? So can you summarize, inshallah? We have about 5 minutes. Can you summarize? So Sheikh Abu Yusuf, Muhammad Yassin has a question.
So you explained that when we see sciences that it gets formed when there's some weakness that appears. So what weakness appeared
Yeah, very good. So the question was, we had explained that usually sciences become formalized when a weakness appears, right? So the weakness was the general decline of the Muslims in terms of their spirituality, in terms of their actions, right? That was the general decline. They're moving away from the deen. So that was the stimulus, kind of.
We need to understand the time that Ibn al-Qayyim came. The Islamic world was destroyed by the Tatar, the children of Genghis Khan. Those people came from Asia Minor and destroy Baghdad. And they had the idea to go through Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Libya, and go all the way to Tunisia, what we know today, Morocco, and go to Europe and link back to Asia Minor, destroying whatever is in front of them. They killed hundreds of thousands of people without account. And that's when Ibn Taymiyyah was among the people who raised the voice for jihad and participated in jihad against those people. If you read the Encyclopedia Americana, and same thing with the British Encyclopedia, they will say that one of the most decisive battle in history is the Battle of Ain Jalut, where the Muslims defeated the Tatar, the Mongols. And after that fight, of course, the Tatar became Muslims. But all the damage. So Ibn al-Qayyim came after the Ummah was very, very low self-esteem, because those people destroy the libraries. They destroy all this civilization that was built. So the Muslims have to start building from scratch. And with that came the weakness that, Imam Atiq is referring to. So it's in that circumstances that all of those jewels were written. I mean, we can elaborate, but for the sake of time. So this period, in fact, it was one of the most difficult period in the life of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Mongols destroyed Baghdad and moved beyond and were killing whoever is in front of them. For no reason, for no reason, except that they want to dominate. It's within this circumstances that Ibn al-Qayyim wrote his masterpieces. Because there was a need. There was a need to bring this ummah back to where it was. Jazakallah khair, brother Atiq. May Allah bless you. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Are those things copyrighted, brother, or we can share them with the audience? Okay, inshallah, if you are on the Usul al-Fiqh list, we have a WhatsApp group. I'll get this from Maulana Atiq, and I said it to you. If you are not, just go to the website on the Usul al-Fiqh. It says register. If you register your name, you will be automatically added to the group of WhatsApp, and we will send you these inshallah. The sooner that I get them, we have about 60 people registered already. So I'll send it to everyone, inshallah, those and whatever else he have. جزاكم الله خير وبارك الله فيكم سبحانك اللهم بحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك, and we will see you inshallah next Tuesday for another halaqa of Ibn al-Qayyim's the Al-Fawa'id, or the collection of wise statements, roughly translation.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله